Did you know that one of the most famous kisses in movie history almost never happened? And the two actors were so cold and exhausted during filming that they could barely speak afterward? From Here to Eternity is a movie that looks smooth and beautiful on screen. Behind the camera, everything was messy, wild, and sometimes dangerous. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about From Here to Eternity. Number 20. The beach kiss was not romantic at all. Most people who have seen From Here to Eternity remember one image more than anything else. Burt Lancaster and Deborah Kerr lying on a Hawaiian beach, waves crashing over them, locked in a passionate kiss. It looks like the most romantic moment ever put on film. It became iconic, it was copied, parodied, and celebrated for decades. But here is the truth that nobody talks about. That beach scene was cold, uncomfortable, and physically exhausting in ways that the final movie never shows you. The beach they filmed on was beautiful, yes, but the Pacific Ocean does not care about movie schedule. The waves came in hard and fast. The sand was rough. The water was shockingly cold during certain parts of the shoot. Deborah Kerr later described the experience as anything but glamorous. She said the waves knocked them around more than once. She said the sand got into everything, their costumes, their eyes, their mouths. Lancaster had to brace himself with real physical strength just to stay in position while the cameras rolled. Director Fred Zinnemann wanted the scene to feel raw and passionate and real. He did not want it to look staged. So he made his actors lie right there in the actual surf with actual waves hitting them again and again. They did multiple takes. Each take meant getting hit by another wave. Each take meant more cold water, more sand, more physical effort. Crew stood back on dry land watching two of Hollywood's biggest stars get tossed around by the Pacific Ocean. And yet, when you watch that scene, it looks effortless. It looks like heaven. It looks like two people completely lost in each other with nothing else in the world mattering at all. That is the magic of great filmmaking. That is what great actors do. They take something that feels awful and make it look wonderful. What looked like paradise on screen was exhausting, cold, and chaotic behind the camera. Number 19. Frank Sinatra begged for his role. By the early 1950s, Frank Sinatra's career was in serious trouble. He had been one of the biggest stars in the world during the 1940s. Teenage girls screamed at his concerts. His records sold millions of copies. He was everywhere. And then, almost overnight, things fell apart. His voice developed problems. His personal life became tabloid news. His record sales dropped. His movie career stalled. Studio executives stopped returning his calls. Frank Sinatra, one of the most famous men alive, was suddenly being told he was finished. He read James Jones's novel From Here to Eternity. He read the character of Angelo Maggio, a scrappy, funny, heartbreaking little soldier from New Jersey, and something inside him lit up like a fire. He knew that was his role. He felt it in his bones. He told everyone who would listen. He called Columbia Pictures. He wrote letters. He asked his friends to put in good words. He offered to do the role for almost nothing, reportedly around $8,000, which was a fraction of what major stars earned at the time. The studio was not convinced at first. Producer Harry Cohn had other actors in mind. Eli Wallach was seriously considered for the role of Maggio. But Sinatra kept pushing. He kept calling. He kept showing up. He flew to Africa, where director Fred Zinnemann was finishing another film, just to make his case in person. That kind of desperation, that raw hunger, was exactly what the character of Maggio needed. He got the role, and then he won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. His career exploded back to life. From Here to Eternity did not just give Frank Sinatra a good movie. It gave him back his entire life. Sometimes a single role can save a person. That one was his lifeline. Number 18. Deborah Kerr broke her own image. Forever before. From Here to Eternity, Deborah Kerr had a very specific reputation in Hollywood. She was elegant. She was proper. She was British and refined, and always perfectly composed. She played queens, nuns, and noble ladies. She was known for being dignified and untouchable. Studios loved casting her that way. Audiences expected it. It had become her brand. And then she showed up on that Hawaiian beach in a white swimsuit, tangled up with Burt Lancaster in the surf, and everything changed in an instant. Audiences could not believe what they were seeing. This was not the Deborah Kerr they knew. This was someone completely different, passionate, reckless, alive with desire and longing and heat. The performance was stunning. It was brave, completely unexpected. Director Fred Zinnemann later said that casting Deborah Kerr against type was one of the smartest decisions he ever made. He knew that the audience's surprise, their shock at seeing her this way, would add another layer of emotion to the scene. And he was absolutely right. Part of what makes that beach scene so powerful is the feeling that something forbidden is happening. Something that breaks the rules. Deborah Kerr, of all people, doing this. It amplified everything. Kerr herself said she was nervous about it. She worried how audiences would react. She worried about her image and her career. But she trusted the director and the material, and she jumped in, literally into those cold waves, and gave one of the performances of her life. She was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress that year. She never got to play the proper British lady quite the same way after that. That was the best thing that ever happened to her. Breaking your own image can be the beginning of something extraordinary. Number 17. The Army Was Not Happy. At First, From Here to Eternity is set inside the United States Army at Pearl Harbor in the days before the Japanese attack in December of 1941. It shows soldiers drinking too much, fighting their superiors, falling in love with women they should not be near, and suffering under cruel officers who abuse their power. Not exactly a recruitment poster. It is honest and dark and complicated. And when the Army first heard about the film, they were not pleased at all. James Jones wrote the original novel based on his own real experiences as a soldier stationed at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. He did not hold back. He showed the ugliness of military life, the corruption, the petty cruelty, the boredom. The Army read the novel and immediately worried about what a movie version would look like. They were concerned about their image. They were concerned about how audiences would see them. Producer Harry Cohn and the filmmakers had to negotiate very carefully. They needed the Army's cooperation. They needed access to real military locations, real equipment, real barracks. Without that, the movie would look cheap and fake. They agreed to soften certain things. Some of the darkest elements of the novel were toned down. The Army's worst behaviors were made slightly less extreme in the screenplay. But even with those compromises, the film still carries real power. It still shows soldiers as complicated human beings. It refuses to pretend that military life is clean and simple and noble all the time. The Army eventually cooperated and allowed filming at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. When they saw the finished film, many of them were actually proud of it. Sometimes you have to give a little to get something great made. The compromise was worth it. Number 15. Donna Reed played against everything she was known for. Is a name that might surprise you. Donna Reed. You know anything about American television history, you know Donna Reed as the warm, perfect, cheerful mother from The Donna Reed Show. She was the definition of wholesome. She was the kind of actress that families trusted completely. Sweet, safe, comfortable. That was Donna Reed. And in From Here to Eternity, she played a woman who works in a dance hall, a polite way of describing a character who is, essentially, a prostitute. A woman who sells her company to lonely soldiers. A woman living on the margins of respectability in pre-war Hawaii. This was about as far from wholesome as Hollywood was willing to go in 1953. Reed won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for that performance. She beat out some very strong competition, and the win surprised almost everyone, including, reportedly, Donna Reed herself. She later talked about how strange it felt to win Hollywood's highest honor for a role that was so different from everything she had ever done before. The role showed something that audiences had never seen from her. There was sadness in her character, and longing, and a kind of resilience that came from a hard life. She made Alma feel real and human and sympathetic without ever asking for pity. It was quiet, careful, completely controlled work. And it was unforgettable. One daring role revealed a depth that no one knew she had. Number 14. The novel was called unpublishable. Before From Here to Eternity became a celebrated film, it was a celebrated and controversial novel by James Jones. Published in 1951, it was raw and honest and filled with language and situations that made many people very uncomfortable. It dealt with violence, sexuality, abuse, and the grim reality of military life in ways that American fiction rarely did at the time. And before it was published, many people said it could not be published, should not be published. Some early readers called it too dark, too explicit, too honest. There were real concerns about whether any major publisher would touch it. The language alone, the rough, unfiltered speech of real soldiers, was enough to alarm people. In the early 1950s, Mitchell at Scribner's worked closely with James Jones on the manuscript for years. There were revisions. There were debates. There were moments when the whole project seemed like it might fall apart. Jones was stubborn about his vision. He had lived this life. He had been these men. He did not want to soften the truth of what he had experienced. Eventually, the book came out. It was over 800 pages long, and it became a massive bestseller. Readers responded to its honesty in a way that surprised even its supporters. It hit the New York Times bestseller list and stayed there for weeks. People were hungry for that kind of truth. It was almost rejected, became one of the most important American novels of its decade. Sometimes the things people say cannot be done are the things most worth doing. Number 13. Fred Zinnemann fought for every dark moment director. Fred Zinnemann was already respected in Hollywood by the time he made From Here to Eternity. He had made High Noon the year before, in 1952, and it had been a massive success. He had a reputation for being thoughtful, precise, and deeply committed to realism. He cared about truth in a way that sometimes put him in conflict with studio executives who preferred things a little smooth. Making From Here to Eternity was full of those conflicts. Studio, Columbia Pictures, under the famously difficult Harry Cohn, wanted certain things softened. The Army wanted certain things changed. The censorship rules of the era, known as the Production Code, put strict limits on what could be shown. Zinnemann had to fight on multiple fronts just to preserve the honesty that made the story worth telling. He fought for the beach scene. He fought for the darkness in the brig scenes. He fought to keep the complicated moral picture of the military intact. Every step of the way, someone was pushing back. Every step of the way, Zinnemann pushed forward. He also made careful, thoughtful choices about visual style. He shot many scenes with a quiet, still camera. He let actors breathe. He did not rush the emotional moments. He trusted the audience to feel things without being told how to feel. That kind of restraint, that patience, is harder than it looks. The film won 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. Zinnemann's careful, stubborn dedication to honesty was the reason. Every great fight behind the camera shows up as something beautiful on screen. Number 12. The filming location almost was not Hawaii. Obvious now, From Here to Eternity is set in Hawaii. The beaches, the palm trees, the warm military life before Pearl Harbor, all of it is tied to a very specific place. Of course, you would film it in Hawaii. In 1952 and 1953, when production was being planned, filming on location in Hawaii was not the simple decision it might seem today. Studios at that time did a great deal of filming on studio backlots. They built sets. They recreated locations on controlled sound stages where everything could be managed. Weather would not change unexpectedly. Costs could be controlled. Schedules could be kept. Going on location, especially to somewhere as far as Hawaii, was expensive, logistically complicated, and unpredictable. There were serious discussions about whether the Hawaii sequences could be faked, whether the studio backlot could stand in for Schofield Barracks and the beaches and the Hawaiian landscape. Producer Harry Cohn was always watching the budget carefully. He did not like spending money he did not have to spend. But the filmmakers argued that the real Hawaii was essential, that the authenticity of the locations would add something that no backlot could fake, that the light, the air, the actual sand and water would make the film feel alive in a way that mattered. They won that argument. The company went to Hawaii. They filmed at real locations. Schofield Barracks was used with Army cooperation, and that Hawaiian sun and that real Pacific surf made the movie what it is. The realness leaked into every frame. Real places have a soul that no studio set can copy. Number 10. The production code. Put up enormous walls. In 1953, Hollywood operated under something called the Motion Picture Production Code, sometimes called the Hays Code. It was a strict set of rules about what could and could not be shown in American movies. No explicit sexuality, no graphic violence. Marriage and family had to be respected. Authority figures, including military officers, could not be portrayed too negatively without facing punishment. Crime had to be seen to be punished. From here to eternity pushed against almost every single one of those walls. The novel it was based on was filled with things the code absolutely forbade. The beach scene, that famous passionate kiss, had to be carefully calibrated, so it suggested passion without showing anything explicit. The character of Alma, the dance hall girl who is essentially a prostitute in the novel, had to be softened into something more ambiguous on screen. The violence in the brig scenes had to be handled carefully. Screenwriter Daniel Taradash worked for months trying to find ways to preserve the emotional truth of the story while navigating all of these restrictions. It was like trying to paint a portrait while someone kept covering parts of the canvas. He had to find ways to imply, suggest, and hint at things he could not show. Remarkably, he succeeded. The film still carries enormous emotional and moral weight, despite everything that had to be cut or softened. The passion still burns. The injustice still stings. The tragedy still lands. Working around impossible limits sometimes forces filmmakers to find solutions more powerful than the obvious approach would have been. Number 9. The Pearl Harbor attack sequence was deeply personal. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, is one of the most devastating moments in American history. Thousands of people died. The United States was pulled into the Second World War. The world changed forever in a matter of hours. Filming a sequence that depicted that attack, that sacred, terrible morning, carried enormous weight and responsibility. Director Fred Zinnemann and his team were deeply aware of that responsibility. Many of the people watching the film in 1953 had lived through that day. Some of them had lost family members. Some of them had been there themselves. This was not ancient history. This was a wound that was still fresh for millions of Americans. The sequence in the film is filmed with a kind of restrained, horrified energy. There is chaos, but Zinnemann does not let it become spectacle. He keeps the camera close to individual human beings, their faces, their confusion, their fear, their courage. He never lets the audience forget that real people were dying. Real lives were being destroyed in those. James Jones, who wrote the source novel, had been at Schofield Barracks on that actual morning. He had survived the attack. He had seen it with his own eyes. During production, he spoke about what it actually felt and sounded and smelled like. That first-hand testimony shaped how the filmmakers approached those scenes. What you see on screen carries the weight of real memory. It is not just drama, it is witness. Number 8. Harry Cohn was a terrifying boss. Every great Hollywood story has a villain. In the making of From Here to Eternity, that role was played by Harry Cohn, the head of Columbia Pictures. Cohn was famous throughout Hollywood for being one of the most difficult, demanding, and frightening studio bosses who ever lived. He had an enormous ego, a volcanic temper, and an absolute conviction that he knew better than everyone else about what the public wanted to see. He ran Columbia with an iron grip. He read every script. He watched every rough cut. He argued with directors, writers, and stars. He fired people. He terrified people. He was the kind of boss who made grown men and women nervous just walking into his office. And yet, when it came to From Here to Eternity, something interesting happened. Harry Cohn, the man famous for fighting with everyone, eventually got out of the way and let the filmmakers do their best work, because he truly trusted Zinnemann, or because he recognized how important the source material was, or because the stars attached to the project gave him confidence. Something worked. He did push back on budget. He did insist on certain compromises. He was never exactly easy, but compared to his reputation, his involvement in From Here to Eternity was almost cooperative. And the result was 8 Academy Awards and one of the most celebrated films in Columbia's history. Even a difficult boss can sometimes step back and let greatness happen. A tyrant who knew when to let go helped make something timeless. Number 7. The movie changed. The way Hollywood handled serious books. Before From Here to Eternity, there was a general feeling in Hollywood that certain kinds of novels were too dark, too complicated, and too honest to be made into successful movies. Stories about military brutality, moral ambiguity, and human weakness without easy resolution. Those were considered risky. Audiences wanted entertainment. They wanted happy endings, or at least satisfying ones. Dark, complicated, messy truth was better left on the page. From Here to Eternity proved that idea completely wrong. Here was a film that did not give audiences easy comfort. The hero does not win in the end. The system is not fixed. Justice does not triumph neatly. Good people die while the world keeps turning without stopping to notice. And audiences absolutely loved it. They packed theaters, they cried, they talked about the film for weeks. The commercial and critical success of From Here to Eternity sent a clear message to every studio in Hollywood. Audiences were more sophisticated than people had assumed. Handle complexity. They could sit with tragedy. They could appreciate a story that told the truth, even when the truth was painful. Opened doors. In the years that followed, Hollywood became more willing to adapt challenging novels, to explore darker themes, to trust that audiences wanted something more than simple escapism. The movie helped change the entire conversation about what American cinema could be and do. One film can shift the direction of an entire industry. Number 6. Burt Lancaster almost did not play Sergeant Warden. It is almost impossible to imagine From Here to Eternity without Burt Lancaster. His Sergeant Warden is magnetic and complicated and deeply physical. A man who runs the Army unit while his commanding officer falls apart. A man who falls in love with the commander's wife. A man carrying enormous power and enormous conflict inside him at the same time. Lancaster was born to play that role, but the role was not always his. In the early stages of casting, other names were discussed. Alda Ray, who had appeared in other films of that era, was one actor seriously considered. There was discussion about other established stars of the period. The role of Warden required someone with genuine physicality and presence, but also surprising emotional depth. That combination was not easy to find. Lancaster had already established himself as a serious actor by this point. He was known for his physical intensity and his willingness to take on complicated roles. He pushed hard to be in the film. He understood immediately how important the material was. When he finally stepped into the role, he brought everything: the strength, the frustration, the longing, the self-awareness. His scenes with Deborah Kerr crackle with real electricity. His scenes with Frank Sinatra feel like two different energies colliding in exactly the right way. The film simply would not be the same with anyone else playing Warden. The role needed someone who could be powerful and vulnerable in the same breath. Lancaster did exactly that. The right actor in the right role at exactly the right moment. That is when something unforgettable. Number 5. Deborah Kerr did her own stunts in the water. The beach scene. We keep coming back to it because it deserves to be fully understood. Deborah Kerr was not a young woman when this film was made. She was already a polished, established, highly regarded actress with years of work behind her. She could have asked for certain protections. She could have asked for a stunt double to handle the rough physical elements, the waves, the cold water, the sand, the repeated takes. That would have been completely reasonable. She did not do that. Deborah Kerr got in the water herself. Every take, every wave. She lay in the actual surf with the actual Pacific Ocean crashing over her, with actual sand filling her costume, with actual cold water soaking through everything. She did not complain about it publicly. She simply did the work. There is a reason to understand why this matters beyond just being impressive. When an actor is truly in a difficult physical situation, cold, wet, uncomfortable, fighting against real natural forces, something happens to the face and body that cannot be faked. The tension is real. The effort is real. Small involuntary reactions of muscles and eyes and breath, all of it is real. The camera catches all of it. Is part of why the beach scene feels so alive and real. Because it was. Deborah Kerr was genuinely wet and genuinely cold and genuinely working hard to maintain her position in real surf. And all of that genuine physical reality translated into emotional reality on screen. Real discomfort, captured perfectly, became screen magic. Number 4. Daniel Teradash's screenplay was a miracle of adaptation, an 800-page novel filled with things the censors would never allow, and turning it into a screenplay that could actually be filmed under studio pressure, under Army pressure, under production code pressure, and under the weight of a source novel that millions of people had already read and loved. This was one of the most difficult writing jobs in Hollywood history. Daniel Teradash was the man who did it. He spent enormous amounts of time breaking down the novel, identifying what the emotional core of each storyline was, figuring out what could be kept and what had to be changed, and what had to be cut entirely. He had to find ways to preserve the spirit of James Jones's work even when the letter of it was impossible. Some of his solutions were brilliant. The character of Alma, sanitized by the production code from her original identity, still carries the feeling of a woman living outside the boundaries of respectability, even without the explicit details. You understand her situation. You feel the limitations of her life. The code forced Teradash to be subtle, and subtlety turned out to be more powerful than explicitness would have been. Teradash won the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. He deserved it completely. What he managed to accomplish, honoring the source material, satisfying the restrictions, serving the actors, and creating something that still felt honest and alive, was genuinely extraordinary. Screenplay writing is not just writing. Sometimes it is sculpting something beautiful out of impossible materials. Number 3. The film won 8 Academy Awards out of 13 nominations. 8 Academy Awards. That number needs a moment to settle. From Here to Eternity was nominated for 13 Oscars and won 8 of them. In 1954, at the 26th Academy Awards ceremony, the film swept through nearly every category it was in. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, Best Sound. And of course, the 2 Supporting Acting Awards, Frank Sinatra for Best Supporting Actor and Donna Reed for Best Supporting Actress. This was not just a successful movie. This was a total triumph, a declaration from the film industry that this story, these performances, this director, this creative team had created something truly exceptional. 8 wins out of 13 nominations is an extraordinary success rate. It placed the film among the great award winners in Academy history. What makes this even more remarkable is what the film was working against. It was based on a controversial novel. It had been forced to make compromises with censors and the military. It was dealing with difficult, dark material in an era when Hollywood preferred things. Every obstacle that existed in the making of this film, every compromise, every fight, every limitation, somehow got transformed into quality on screen. Academy voters that year recognized something rare. They recognized a film that had used every tool available to tell a true story about human beings caught in forces beyond their control. And they honored it accordingly. 13 chances, 8 victories, every single one of them earned. Number 2. The film arrived exactly when America needed it. 1953 was a specific moment in American history. The Korean War had just ended. The McCarthy era, a period of fear, suspicion, and accusations about communist influence in American life, was at its peak. American soldiers had come home from another war. The country was processing trauma, patriotism, confusion, and grief all at the same time. Into that specific moment, From Here to Eternity landed. It was a film about American soldiers, but not idealized, heroic soldiers marching toward easy victory. About real soldiers. Flawed, struggling, suffering soldiers trying to live with dignity inside a system that did not always treat them with dignity. It was about ordinary people, men and women, trying to love and survive in a world on the edge of catastrophe. Audiences recognized themselves in those characters. They recognized the frustration of being powerless inside a large institution. They recognized the longing for connection and love and meaning. They recognized the sadness of watching the world move toward disaster while ordinary life continues around you. These were feelings that millions of Americans in 1953 understood deeply and personally. The film did not offer easy comfort. It did not tell people everything would be fine. It told people the truth, that life is complicated, that good people suffer, that the world is not always just. And it wrapped that truth in beautiful performances and stunning craft and genuine emotional power. A film that tells the truth about its moment in time becomes timeless. That is what happened here. Number 1. The film permanently changed what war movies could be. For most of early Hollywood history, war movies worked in a fairly predictable way. There were heroes and villains. The heroes were brave and good. The enemy was evil. Sacrifice was noble and meaningful. Victory was the end point. The message was clear. War, though terrible, reveals the best in human beings and the best in nature. From Here to Eternity demolished that template. It was not a war movie in the traditional sense. It was set just before a war, but it dealt with military life, military culture, and the machinery of conflict in a way that had never been done before at this level of mainstream Hollywood success. It showed that the military contained cruelty, corruption, injustice, and small-minded power being exercised over vulnerable people. It showed that the system that was supposed to protect its members could also destroy them. And it did all of this while still being deeply patriotic in the truest sense, the sense of caring enough about your country to be honest about its failures. The characters in From Here to Eternity love America. They serve in the Army. But they are not blind to what the Army does to certain men. They see it clearly. They feel it personally. Every dark, honest, complicated war film that came after, from Paths of Glory to Apocalypse Now to Platoon to Full Metal Jacket, owes something to the door that From Here to Eternity pushed open in 1953. It proved that audiences could handle the truth. It proved that the truth was worth telling. One film, 1 year, one decision. The movies were never quite the same again. Bonus fact: the secret of Schofield Barracks and what it meant to James Jones. Here is something that almost never gets discussed when people talk about From Here to Eternity. The real Schofield Barracks in Hawaii, the actual military base where much of the film was shot, was not just a location to the filmmakers. It was something much more personal and much more complicated than that. And at the center of that complication was the man who started everything, James Jones. Jones had been stationed at Schofield Barracks beginning in 1939. He had spent years there before Pearl Harbor. He had lived the life that became his novel, the boxing pressures, the rigid hierarchy, the complicated relationships between soldiers and the women at the dance hall, the small cruelties of men with power over men without it. He had breathed that specific Hawaiian air and walked those specific paths and heard those specific bugle calls in the dark. When the filmmakers returned to Schofield Barracks to shoot the film, they were literally filming in the places where the real events had happened, or something very close to the real events that Jones had fictionalized. The barracks they walked through were barracks Jones had walked through. The parade grounds they filmed on were grounds where he had stood. The landscape was identical to the landscape of his memory and his trauma and his most formative years. Jones visited the set during production. He watched the actors walk through his past. He saw Montgomery Clift play a version of the young, idealistic, stubborn soldier Jones had once been. He saw the world he had lived, the world he had carried inside him for over a decade, being recreated with a seriousness and care that honored what he had experienced. There is a photograph from that period that shows Jones on set, watching. His face is difficult to read. There is something in his expression that looks like recognition and loss and maybe gratitude, all mixed together in a way that has no simple name. He had written those 800 pages because he needed to testify to what he had seen. He had fought to get them published because the truth deserved to be heard. And now, watching on that Hawaiian morning, he could see that the truth had been heard, not just by book readers, but by moviegoers all over the world. The young soldier who had survived Pearl Harbor, who had carried these stories for years, who had refused to let them die, he got to see them come alive one more time in the very places where they had first begun. The past does not disappear. Sometimes, if someone cares enough, it comes back to life. From Here to Eternity is more than a great movie. It is a reminder of what stories can do when they are told with courage and honesty and care. It is a reminder that the people who seem small, the private who refuses to box, the dance hall girl who dreams of something better, the sergeant who loves someone he cannot have, these people matter. Their lives matter. Their struggles matter. Their small, painful, beautiful stories matter as much as any general's victory or any king's crown. The filmmakers who made this movie in 1953 fought through censors and studios and military bureaucrats and impossible restrictions to tell the truth about real human beings in an impossible moment. They did not always win every fight. They made compromises. But they never lost sight of what the story was really about, which was people trying to live with dignity in a world that did not always make that easy. That is a story for every time, every year, every generation, because every generation faces its own systems, its own pressures, its own moments of feeling small and powerless and desperately human. And every generation needs stories that say, "You are seen, you are real, and your struggle is worth remembering." If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time.